Hello, I'm W.T. Edmondson, and welcome to Focus. Freedom often causes unbelievable silence. Of course, the goal of Focus is to inform, educate, and motivate citizens to action. Our guest today is no stranger to Focus. She's been on the program a number of times. But since she was last on the program, she's taken on a new task. And this is none other than the Reverend Dr. Cassandra Gould. She's the pastor of Quinn Chapel AME Church here in Jefferson City. And she is now the executive director of Missouri Faith Voices. As we spoke last, Quinn Chapel was very busy, and you've been very busy. Tell us a little bit about what's been going on in Quinn Chapel's life and Missouri Faith Voices' life.
Yeah. Thanks again for the opportunity to be on the show, WT. One of the easiest things and the funnest things I get to do today on a busy day. We have a lot going on. Faith Voices, as you know, has been very busy. We are so committed to fighting for racial justice, as well as really demonstrating and exemplifying what it means for faith leaders to stand up. I'll start with Faith Voices, and then I'll work backwards to Quinn Chapel. As you know, within a couple of weeks ago, there were 23 clergy people who were 23 faith leaders who were on trial, and we were there to support you all. I want to say personally and publicly to you that I'm so grateful for your leadership in that, and your courage on that day back in May of 2014 to be willing to put everything on the line to stand for those 700 Missourians a year that actually die still without Medicaid expansion. Missouri Faith Voices was one of the key organizations that helped to organize the rally back in May of 2014 to basically just go to the Senate chambers and say, you all won't talk about Medicaid expansion, but we will. As faith leaders, I think it's real important that we really answer the call, the ongoing call that I believe God has that says to speak up, to speak truth to power. On that day, you and 22 others stood and just spoke truth to power. In our mind, you weren't breaking any laws, but obviously that was something that was different, that the prosecutor here viewed differently. And so we were happy to support you all in the trial that ensued. We were able to coordinate faith leaders from across the state to be present, just to be prophetic witnesses with you all. Little dismayed that you all got any charges. And so we'll be anxious to see what that looks like for you all. But know that we will continue to stand. And my challenge to other faith leaders out there is that we need more people to stand with us. If I have been encouraged by the prophetic witness by people like you, locally, Reverend Dr. John Bennett, and others who just continue to stand for justice, I've been equally dismayed by the number of people who never show up, who never seem to speak up, who are really absent from those spaces. There are a lot of people that are in pain, not just in this country, but in this very community. And I believe that there is something for all of us to do. So I'm really making a clarion call to other faith leaders that may not be involved under the banner of Missouri Faith Voices, but other people that are open on Sundays in the name of God who preach the gospel of Jesus Christ, to actually really examine the text and look at what Jesus does and how Jesus is always advocating for those who are left out, the marginalized, and etc., and to come and join us and to stand with us as we continue to speak truth for power. I'm grateful for a church like Quinn Chapel that fully supports that work. I was a little nervous because I never thought of having an additional job. But when I realized it, and even in talking to some of my parishioners, some of my officers, they said, well, Pastor, that's the work that you're doing anyway. So now you just have a different framework in which to do that work. So I'm grateful to pastor a church that fully supports what it means to be church outside of Sunday morning and what it means to be church, beyond the walls of the church. One of the highlights of our summer has been being the host to Nuns on the Bus. Nuns on the Bus is a national organization of nuns. run by Sister Simone Campbell. They're housed out of Washington, D.C., and they travel all around the country pretty much every summer and have conversations about the gap in healthcare, other disparities, economic disparities, educational disparities, and et cetera. And so we were really happy to be able to host them this summer and to have kind of a community town hall where people came in and were able to dialogue about those kinds of issues. And so that's the kind of church that Quinn is, a church that says we're always open and available to bring the community in. As you know, Faith Voices for Jefferson City. Quinn Chapel is the headquarters for that. We're open for meetings and public assemblies, and so we're proud of those kinds of things.
To piggyback on what you're basically saying here is that as we think about all of the things that go on in a capital city, being the seat of state government, there are so many opportunities for communities to really get involved in the decision-making process for the entire state.
Yes.
And to be located right here in the state capital and not take advantage of that opportunity to speak to your legislators, where you don't have to travel 130 miles to speak to your legislator. It is very important for communities to get involved, and faith leaders. I think there's an expectation from the congregation that if you're going to preach to me on Sunday morning about doing what Jesus would do, then I expect you to do the same. And so for you to have a congregation that see that and is willing to give you that space to do that, because there are many individuals who would probably say, you came here to preach and not be out in the community all the time, and not understanding that people looking to faith leaders to do more than preach on Sunday morning. Absolutely.
And there's a lot of talk, I would call it in movement space, that people say, well, where's the church? The church is absent, and et cetera. I don't think the church is completely absent, but I think that reality is there is a void and a vacuum. And I can understand that sometimes you just don't know what to do. But finding a way to do something, being on the front line is not for everybody, but I think that there is a way in which we have a lot of moral imperatives, Medicaid expansion, very high interest rates with predatory lending. We're facing this horrible voter ID amendment that will be on the ballot on November 8th. And there is a way for everybody to get involved. Right now, with Faith Voices, we're looking for congregations to create canvassing teams to actually go out and knock on doors, not just to register people to vote, but to register people as well as to inform people about what Amendment 6 really does. This amendment that says we have to change the Constitution so that we can ask you for additional documentation before you vote, which really is just a way to impair democracy and to cut people out. And so we really, if there was ever a need and a time for pastors, particularly in Missouri and especially in mid-Missouri, to really step up to the plate, I would think that it's now. Over the last 2 years since the death of Mike Brown, Missouri has been the epicenter of all things bad. There was Mizzou. Obviously, Ferguson really changed the world in many ways. And so to be that close to the pain and to the uprising and to the cries of young people in the streets and not respond is kind of difficult for me to imagine.
Well, talking about photo ID, I think that's a misnomer, when we say voter ID, because it's really photo ID. And to say that there is a disparate treatment when you come to the right to vote, it troubles me that when you say that certain kinds of ID are okay, but then a student can't use his college ID?
Yeah, it's really
something wrong with that.
And so as a as an activist, as someone who realizes I was born, when I was born, if I had been 18 when I was born, I would not have been able to vote. My parents weren't able to vote when I was born. My mother, I've told the story about my mom going to jail in Selma, and in her own words, she was there before Dr. King got there. And so for me, I really take it personal. Our church has, over the last couple of years, 4 or 5 years, have registered students at Lincoln University. And so what this amendment really means as a person of color, that there are many people that look like us that won't have the opportunity to vote if this amendment passed. A student who is from Iowa or Minnesota or Chicago or wherever, with their ID from Illinois, from those other states, won't be able to go and vote beyond this election if this amendment passes. It will require a very specific ID. It has been estimated by our Secretary of State that it would be about $17 million. And so it's very costly. Our Secretary of State's office also said that currently approximately 220,000 Missourians don't have ID. Approximately, I've heard, and I'm not sure that this statistic came from them, but I've heard about another 130,000 have expired IDs. And so you're talking about disenfranchising more than 350 people who...
300,000.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's just immoral. It is simply immoral. And our state already has a protection that says if you are a registered voter and you're 18, you should have that opportunity, to vote. And so why would we have to change the Constitution to say, well, no, now we want to make some adjustments? And so that is one of the things that we are really fighting.
As we think about congregations who you see the pain in your community, people sitting in your pews every Sunday, as you traverse throughout the community, you see people in pain. So there are so many different ways for the faith community to be involved, putting feet on the street, per se. So as you've spoken with faith leaders, pastors in particular, throughout the state, what are some of the things that they are saying to you?
And so mostly, rarely is it a person, and I can really speak for faith leaders across the country. Rarely does a person say, I don't see anything to fight for. I think oftentimes people struggle with the role, kind of distinguishing the roles of prophet and priest. And so many people just feel more called to just be inside the house, inside the church walls. I'm just taking care of my congregation. If they're Christian pastors, they often say, well, I'm just trying to save souls. I don't know about the social justice thing. But when I look at the Bible as a Christian pastor, I'm not sure how you divorce salvation from justice. In Israel, it went well for the kings who took care of the widows and orphans. I mean, Jesus kicks the table over in the temple. Not all of the tables. There were a lot of tables in the temple. He kicks the table over of the people who were extrapolating money from the poor people. And so how, Jesus is in the face of the Roman government, which is why he gets crucified. So how, as a Christian pastor, do you not interpret that as a call to do more and to say more and to get beyond your walls? And I think sometimes we confuse mercy ministry with justice. And mercy ministry is great and it's needed. Your food pantries, we give away clothes and, turkeys and all these other things as well. We take care of children at Christmas, but that is literally mercy ministry. And so what I really think that in this moment, in the country, in this moment, in this state, when our backs are really up against the wall on so many things, is that it is a call to be clear. So why do people continue to be in the food line and need the food? Why is there overcrowding at East School, and now there's a developer planning to build some more apartments, which may, seem like, oh, great, this is a good idea. We want more people to live in this area. But if there are more family apartments, there are going to be more students. And how are we going to serve those students? Why are their children going to sleep at night in Jefferson City without food? Why is our homeless population growing? And so, yes, we can provide a meal for those people, but how do we help to get at the underlying problem? How do we help to start to affect policy and even policy makers to change all of the variables that create all of those bad things?
How do we go about educating the individual in the pew? Because I think if we can educate and motivate the individual in the pew, sitting in the pew every Sunday, they will motivate the pastor to do what needs to be done.
Yeah. I think that finding ways, and so certainly in Jefferson City, one of the simple ways is to show up at the Faith Voices Assembly on fourth Mondays at Quinn Chapel. It is a public assembly. It is open, where we were very instrumental in getting an advisory board for transportation, in stopping that the modified transportation plan that would have actually decreased the amount of access to public transportation. We were effective in joining with other citizens and stopping the recent the increase in fare. And so there are many other things. We are working on voter registration. We're working on predatory lending. And so those are ways just for the common, person that sits in a faith assembly on Saturday or Sunday to say, hey, maybe my church doesn't really talk about this, but there's a way that I would like to get involved. And I would love to talk to some of those people myself, to help them be connected in ways that they could start to offset some of these things.
I guess one of the things that has been very educational for me, and also motivational for me, is to see my white brothers and sisters on the front line fighting for things that that are in the society appear to be a minority issue. Okay. And these white brothers and sisters are on the front line, and many of them have been on the front line a long time. And they could very easily sit back in the background and say, well, that's not my problem. But they are really out there on the front line fighting along with us. And so that has been very, very encouraging to me, and to see some of these ministers are not young kids.
No.
They've been out there a long time.
No. And I think, as I talk to people around the country, so I think that everybody has a role to play. I think some of our white colleagues who work alongside us and fight alongside us, as I always say, so everybody has like the crazy cousin who's like not in the fight, actually, who's probably part of the reason that we're fighting. And so I think that there are roles for them to continue to play, and sometimes they have more of an audience with those people who are helping to make bad policies. And so for them to also start to speak truth to power to those people who have great influence on policy, to actually invite others that are like them to also come and join us. And then our role on the flip side of that is to educate more minorities about opportunities to be empowered and to stand up and to really continue to call on our brothers and sisters of faith to say, we need you in this fight as well. And historically, when you look at the civil rights movement, if you look at pictures, it's like the same people around Dr. King. And so I don't think today is much different, but I do think that we are in this generation, in this time period, like we have not seen in the last half century. We are at a place that there are just alarm bells going off all over. And I believe that faith is on the line. And so when faith is on the line, I believe that God requires faith leaders to show up and to materialize goodness in the face of evil. And so I think that that's what we're called to do, and it takes all of us doing some part of that.
Well, and you kind of touched on this earlier. All of us have a calling on our lives. It is a matter of finding out what that calling is. And so individuals, when I think many times when they hear, well, an individual has a calling, they're thinking about preaching.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But there are so many ways that the Lord calls us to make a difference.
Yes.
And that difference does not have to be something gigantic.
No.
You know, just some very little small things that He may ask us to do, require us to do. And if we set on that, then we're not honoring God within that itself.
Yeah. I think we all have a social responsibility. And I don't think you have to be a person of faith to understand that we are somehow connected to our brothers and sisters. I think we just have to ask our question ourselves, like, well, who's really my brother and sister? Mm-hmm. And who do I really care enough about to actually fulfill this role, this divine role that I have to make a difference? And if I don't do that, who am I putting at risk? Mm-hmm. And so I think when we start to ask ourselves those kinds of questions, like, who am I? So if there's a pastor out there that's not involved in any kind of way, so look in your pews, look in the neighborhood that your churches are located in. And maybe it's not in your neighborhood, but look around Jefferson City. The beauty of it is it's not real big. And so, we can drive from one end of town to the other end of town in 10, 11 minutes. And so drive through the community and see where it looks like there could be some painful situations going on. How can I actually be involved in that and offsetting some of that pain? And as faith leaders, like, where does whatever book I'm using, if as a Christian pastor, the Holy Bible, what does my faith say about people in oppressed situations? And if you can say that your faith says, God bless them and they'll be okay and it's not your issue, then this is not a fight for you. Mm-hmm. But if you can really answer that question honestly, then I think that you'll have some clarity around what you're called to do and how you're called to do it.
When we think about young people, the fight of the civil rights movement, social justice of the 60s, it's not the fight of the day. And so young people have a different slant on how they're going to address power. And so there has been somewhat of a clash between the stellar civil rights leaders and the younger upcoming leaders. Speak a little bit about that.
So I would say yes and no.
Okay.
I think that there's been more clash from what I call armchair quarterbacks and the armchair activists, or in this modern day, Facebook or Twitter activists. People who are not really putting in the skin in the game. Some people in my generation and a little older who have been very quick to critique young people. So think about this. Dr. King was 39 when he died. He was a young person. Mm-hmm. He was a millennial who was fighting. He had this whole nonviolent approach. And interfacing with people from Black Lives Matter movement, from spending an extreme amount of time on the streets in Ferguson, visiting Mizzou during the uprising and being in conversation with those students, being in conversation with millennials across this country. I've not sat down and had a conversation with someone who says, we just want to be violent, we want to do this. But what I do believe is that they realize that this, what I call post-civil rights posture of respectability, didn't get us anywhere. Mm-hmm. And so after Dr. King dies, then we get, we've got civil rights legislation, we're able to vote. Redlining, at least the redlining is not done with a red line that you can see. Right. It's done with invisible ink. Mm-hmm. There's a sense of freedom. I can live over here, I can go to school over there, and etc. I think that we as African Americans, particularly middle class and upper middle class African Americans, we fell prey to this sense of respectability. So I'll do all the right things, I'll say the right things, I'll be educated, I'll make this amount of money, live in this place, drive this kind of car, and my life and my children's life will just be fine. And so I think where younger people they were born into a world that wasn't true. Mm-hmm. And we couldn't hide it anymore that wasn't true. And so what they're really in essence saying is that your really quiet, nice way of trying to play nice and make sure that you get invited to all of these dinners with the politicians and allow them to come parade across your pulpit, that didn't work so well for us, because that's what got us the condition that we're in right now. And so we're not playing like that anymore. We are literally just being able to go and try to dismantle and in many cases disrupt the norm. I'm watching it play out in Ferguson, watching it across the country where prosecutors are being replaced. People are actually positioning their own candidates, and oftentimes younger candidates, and not really coloring within the lines. And so I think it's a both and. Sadly, we face some of the same kinds of things that were evident and that the civil rights activists were fighting for. Those things have not gone away. And so I think from the lens of a millennial, what you all did in the interim didn't really work. So let's try a more aggressive way of doing this. And so I think in essence, we're often saying the same things. They're just using language, and sometimes every now and then profane, because they really have this righteous indignation.
Well, and I think one of the things is that if we look at where the civil rights movement started, it did not start one year and end the next.
Absolutely.
So this is a long struggle.
It's a marathon.
Right.
It is really a marathon.
Yeah, and so you had spaces for adjusting, collaborating, and then sometime it works, sometime it doesn't. So you tear it down and rebuild it until you really get some results.
And I think the young people really have more than we know. I think that because many of them, they study Dr. King, they study Bayard Rustin and all these other John Lewis, and they do an awful lot of convening, an awful lot of strategizing. I think what makes some people of my generation and older a little nervous, they're not inviting us into the room. So we don't really know what they're doing, and we're afraid.
Yeah. Well, in closing, as we think about the four walls, what do you see happening within the four walls within the next 5, 10 years that's going to be different than today? And what do you see happening outside the four walls within the next 10 years?
And so when you speak of the walls of the church or of faith communities, so I think that, and in a sense it's already started to happen, I think that inside the four walls, for pastors who are too afraid to preach a gospel of justice, that they will start to see a waning number of people. I believe that they will start to see, even if people are still there, they become a little more apathetic and a little disconnected, because then they realize that what happens on Saturday or Sunday in my place of worship says nothing about what happens the rest of the days of my life. And so if I'm only spending like an hour to, in the black church, a 2-hour period of time here, and that's completely disconnected to the rest of the hours that I have during the week. And in here, they're not even talking about those things that affect me. And so I think that people will really start to lose interest in traditional forms of faith and worship as we know them. I believe that Black Lives Matter and other millennial-led uprisings are a call to the church to actually be the church. I don't think that it is a sense of anti-church or anti-faith. I think it is a calling on the carpet and a call to be accountable. And in some ways, what I see is that it has radicalized faith leaders in a way that we had not been for a while, I'll say that. We kind of went through this period, and certainly not everybody, but there was this rise of prosperity gospel, which went along with this 80s ethos of, it's all about me, my four, and no more. And I think now there's this call back into this communal response. What is happening in the community? As you know, Quinn Chapel moved within the last 3 years. but we're still in the same community because the parishioner said, this is the community that God put us in more than 100 years ago, and this is the community that we are called to stay in. This is the community that if we're not in, nobody's really tending to what's going on in this community. So what I see is, for some who dare to answer the call and to be prophetic, there's going to be a bridge between the church and the community. For others who just won't wake up and they want to just keep doing business as usual and, focusing on the things that as good church people we know how to focus on, just focus on our annual days, give away those 5 turkeys and buy 2 people some Christmas clothes and everything will be all right. For those who choose to do that, I think that there will be some more distancing between the cries of the people. Certainly less millennials will show up, and I think that we will start to really just be almost pallbearers to a dying institution if we're not responding in a way that is a reflection of the pain that exists in the streets. And so my hope is, my dissertation for my doctorate was Beyond the Walls, and the power of prophetic teaching and preaching, basically to get people to answer the call of justice. And so I hope that our colleagues, not just in Jefferson City, but across the state, are really even wrestling with what it means to really answer that call.
Well, thank you. Dr. Gould?
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming. We hope that this conversation has been enlightening to you. As Dr. Gould indicated, you have an opportunity to come to Quinn Chapel on the 4th Monday of every month for a community assembly. We talk about various issues, strategize, and plot our course for the future. So we hope that you will take the time to come and see what's going on and give us your input. We'll see you next time. God bless.